Everyone at Eastwood Medical Center thought Thomas was just the janitor. He moved quietly through the hospital corridors in his worn brown uniform, pushing his cart of cleaning supplies, head down, never asking for attention. Most people barely noticed him. Doctors passed by without a nod. Nurses greeted him politely if they remembered. Patients barely registered his presence. But Thomas saw everything. For 17 years, he swept those floors, mopped up messes, and emptied trash bins. But he also watched. Not because he was nosy, but because he had once stood on the other side of life, the side where people listened to him, respected him, feared him. What no one knew was that Thomas hadn't always been a janitor. Once, a long time ago, he sat on the board of one of the country's biggest tech companies. He wore suits tailored in Italy, flew first class, and had assistants managing his every move. But life has a way of flipping itself upside down. And when it did for Thomas, it happened fast. Too fast. He lost his wife to cancer, his company to a betrayal, and his fortune to a single signature on the wrong set of papers. In the span of 9 months, he went from penthouses to shelters. He could have ended it all, but something inside him, something quiet and persistent, told him he still had a purpose. So when he found a job opening for a janitor at Eastwood Medical Center, he took it. Not because he loved cleaning floors, but because it gave him access to people. Real people. People who were hurting, and he knew pain. He understood it in a way most people didn't. He worked quietly for years, learning the rhythms of the hospital, the way the emergency room pulsed like a heart at night, how grief echoed louder in waiting rooms at 3 a.m., how joy smelled like freshly brewed coffee after a baby's cry filled the maternity ward. Then one day a buzz filled the hospital like static. Word spread quickly. A new patient was being admitted to the private VIP suite on the 12th floor. It was Harold Bainbridge. Even Thomas blinked at the name. Harold Bainbridge was one of the richest men in the country. He owned railways, shipping lines, and media companies. His face had been on the cover of Forbes more times than anyone could count. People called him the billionaire builder. But here he was, not in a suit, not on a stage, not in front of cameras, but rolled into Eastwood Medical on a gurney, barely conscious. Heart failure. Rumors said it was serious. The hospital went into overdrive. Security tightened. Doctors were on call around the clock. Nurses whispered when they passed by the 12th floor. Reporters waited outside for updates. But Bainbridge himself remained quiet. He refused visitors, refused interviews, barely spoke to the nurses. But Thomas noticed something no one else did. Every night after the last nurse left, the billionaire would stare at a small, tattered photograph he kept under his pillow. He never showed it to anyone. He never spoke about it. But one night, as Thomas mopped quietly near the open door, he caught a glimpse of it. His heart nearly stopped. It was a photo of a young woman. A woman Thomas recognized. Her name was Evelyn. 30 years ago, she was Thomas's first love, and Harold Bainbridge had stolen her from him. The memory came rushing back like a flood. Thomas and Evelyn had been inseparable in college. She was fiery, brilliant, gentle. They talked about marriage, a future, but then Harold, rich, confident, charming, entered their lives. He was Thomas's college roommate, a friend, or so Thomas thought. But slowly Harold began to manipulate. He twisted stories, cast doubt, created distance, and one day Evelyn left. No explanation, just a letter. Thomas never saw her again, and now, decades later, the man who'd taken everything from him, his company, his love, his life, was lying frail and alone in a hospital bed, holding a photograph of the woman they both had once loved. Thomas could have walked away, Let fate do its work. Let Harold suffer alone. But he didn't. Instead, he cleaned Harold's room with extra care, left fresh flowers on the windowsill, brought coffee for the nurses to lift their moods. And then, one evening, as the sun set outside and the machines beeped quietly, Thomas stepped into the room. Harold looked up, startled. "I know who you are," Thomas said softly. Harold's eyes narrowed. "Do you?" Thomas nodded. "And I know what you did. Back then. To me. To Evelyn." Silence filled the room like thick smoke. Harold looked away. "I never stopped regretting it." Thomas sat in the chair beside the bed, something he hadn't done in years. "Then why didn't you say anything? All these years?" Harold's voice cracked. "Because I was a coward. I had everything. Power, money, respect. But none of it mattered. She left me too. Said she could see who I really was. I've been alone ever since." Thomas looked at the frail man, no longer a titan but a shadow of one, and something inside him broke, not in pain, in release, forgiveness. He didn't come to gloat. He didn't come for revenge. He came for closure, and maybe something more. Over the next weeks, Thomas became more than just the janitor in Harold's room. He became his listener, his quiet companion. They talked, really talked, about the past, about mistakes, about Evelyn, about the company, the betrayal, the choices that led them both to where they were now. And one night, just as the moonlight hit the window, Harold said something Thomas never expected to hear. "I don't have family, Thomas. No heirs. But I kept tabs on you. I knew what happened after you lost everything. I admired your humility, your strength. That's why I chose this hospital. I wanted to find you." Thomas sat still, stunned. "I'm not asking you to forget," Harold said. "But if you could, carry forward what we started once, the dream, the vision. I want to leave everything to you, the company, the foundation. It's all written. You deserve it." Tears filled Thomas's eyes, not for the money, not for the power, but because somehow the boy who had once been betrayed now held the hand of the man who broke him and was choosing to let go. When Harold passed away a week later, quietly in his sleep, the media went wild, but no one could explain why the billionaire's will left everything to a janitor. People speculated, investigated, debated. But Thomas didn't explain. He simply left the hospital one day, turned in his mop, and walked out into the morning sun. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't throw parties. He started a foundation in Evelyn's name. It helped underprivileged students get an education. It provided scholarships to children of hospital workers. It funded research for heart disease. He also quietly rebuilt the tech company he once helped launch. And in his office, on a wooden shelf, sat a single photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a soft smile. The story wasn't about revenge. It was about how life comes full circle, how forgiveness can be stronger than betrayal, and how the janitor, who everyone ignored, turned out to be the man who carried the truth and a legacy forward. Sometimes the ones the world overlooks are the ones holding the deepest truths. Thomas didn't choose revenge. He chose redemption, and in doing so, he reminded us that dignity can be found in silence and greatness can rise from humility.